Buffs here, and today we're going to be taking a look at Twisted Tools S layer. So S layer is an ensemble you can open in Reactor, and so we're going to be taking a look at how this works and what it is. This is the intro to the series video, so I expect you to already know a little bit about Reactor. I expect you to know this is the browser icon. It opens up the browser, this little magnifying glass you can go through here, and I'm assuming you can get S layer open. Take a look at their manual that comes with it. It's very, very good, but we're going to be going over all the functions and features as well, just if you have additional questions. The other one that's going to be an important one for you to know about is this structure icon. This enables the edit mode. So this is the edit mode button. And as you can see, we enter edit mode and it's visible here by these icons. Like you can see just the sidebar and panel up here that allows you to see it. And you have a little breadcrumb trail. And you're actually able to go into the structure of the synth. So we're not going to be messing with those in this video, but they'll come up once or twice. Nothing too crazy though, so don't worry too much. And what this is, S layer is a multi-sample manipulation tool. I'm going to assume that you already have a general grasp of what things are, like limiters. I'm assuming you know what a limiter is, what layering, what samples are, what let's see here, envelopes. And things like this are presented in a sort of a different manner than you may be used to looking at them. But things like what are filters, stuff of that nature. I'm assuming you know that stuff. If not, I cover this sort of stuff in my Sound and Synth Basics playlist course on my YouTube channel. So you can go check that out. So moving on. So this is S layer. S layer, you can give it up to 8 samples and it will use controlled randomization to generate interesting output. So here I've got some samples and I'm able to randomize things. As you can see here, I'm randomizing various parameters by hitting these random buttons. And I can actually hear what my sound will sound like by hitting the trigger button. Alternatively, I can use my keyboard or anything that could send MIDI notes. And I just touched a machine, but you can't see that because it's below. But what it is down here, you can actually set it to be responsive to a keyboard. And you have up to 8 scenes. So these 8 scenes control the parameters that for each scene. So let's just go ahead and jump into this. And don't worry, we'll be covering all this stuff in a little more detail, but I just want to show you a couple cool features. So one of them is, so I have these 8 scenes and I'm able to, starting on C3, and this does not include the 2 negative octaves, so you'd actually hit a C5. And we'll talk about that in more detail a little bit later too. But we have these 8 scenes, and if I hit this is storing the parameters. You can see the parameters are changing as I hit my scenes, allowing me to basically create a small drum kit. Now it is monophonic, so if I try to hit 2 notes at the same time, it's not going to work. So you would have to render out your samples if you want to use it as a drum kit where you have multiple things happening at the same time. But a very, very cool, very, very cool little intuitive way of playing it. You can also hit transpose. It turns off your MIDI key scene switching abilities, and you're able to play it as a note. If that is something you want, you can actually do some cool tonal things that we'll take a look at. Because they have because they have a BPM mode. And because of this, you can do some cool things with loops. You're also able to create tonal instruments. And it's not specific to the BPM mode, but it can handle loops and create things that are time relevant. You have the ability to randomize things. So we have various parameters. This one selects the samples that are being played. And so if I were to hit this and then hit it again, you see it's picked different samples, but I can also randomize it using the randomize button down here or the one up here. And this one will randomize anything that's got an orange dot next to it. So I can do that, and so I get a preview. Let's say I like that, well, I could just record it and make it a one-shot sample. Or if I want to hear it again, I can just hit trigger and it will show me that. So I'm just skimming over a couple of the main features, but that's what the orange dots are for. You're able to internally modulate things. We'll take a look at that in the future, but you're able to hook up 4 modulation sources, and those are found in the modulation sequencers page. And here they are, so you're able to go through here and look at this. You have 2, these are called the insert effects, and you can go into the structure and actually change these. So if we enter the structure, the insert effects are here, and we'll talk about putting different effects there. But you don't have to stick with the ones that are there by default. But by default, they give you a verb and a delay. So pretty handy dandy. We have just some general controls at the top. If we move over to the effects, we actually see that we have a granular engine. So it can actually look at the grains of our sample And if you are unfamiliar with this, let me just real quick show you. If we have this and we hit Control E, it'll open up Edison, which allows me to zoom in quite a bit further. And if we zoom in, we have these sample points. You can think of these as in sets becoming a grain. So a whole bunch of those together could become a grain. And when we look at it in here, we're able to turn it on by clicking over here on the side. And so we could turn on a granular engine and tell it the grain size to select. And then we're able to tell it, the stretch, I believe, controls the speed of playback. If you forget what a parameter does, because there's just a lot of parameters in here, you can have your little icon up here that says I for info hints, and then you can just hover over it, and it will say, oh, it sets the speed of grain playback. So this one does set the size. So I was right. It just had a little brain fart there for a second. So I can say, let's solo this first. So to solo a sound, you just go, and each one of these columns represents a sample. So I'm going to go ahead and solo the first sound. We're going to mess with the first one. And you can't see it right now because I'm cutting it off, but there's a solo right here. So I've soloed the first sound, and we'll talk about this a little more in depth later. But right now, what I've done is grain on. So I turned on the granular engine for the first grain, and I can tell it the size, and then I'm able to tell it the speed of playback. So I could have a very slow or... So this was a kick drum. And if we turn on the transpose mode, which allows us to play it as basically notes, so you get some cool options. You see, it's very, very powerful tonal shaping. If you don't want that, you can turn that off. And let's go ahead and go back to our main page and unsolo. And pretty cool stuff. Okay, there's one other interesting one that I wish someone had told me way sooner. So you have like your attack hold to stay in release. And you also have some filters, which were right here. I believe this way is high pass, this way is low pass. Don't quote me on that. Just use your ears. And we have a external modulation matrix. This is weird that they included it just because I didn't expect this. But you're actually able to take the internal modulation sequencers and use them to control external sources. One of the things, though, that's kind of weird with this is whatever the last sequence value that it had, it will continue to put that value out. So if it ends at 50, it's going to be continually putting out a value of 50. So you want to be aware of that. You generally are going to probably want it to end on a value of 0, but I don't know. Maybe you're going to do something weird with it. But I have other plugs rather than using this, but we'll take a look at that. But here's where it gets interesting. So we have our insert effects, so we could treat them as sends and inserts, and really cool. And so there is a difference. But if we come over here to multi-out, this is cool. So let's say that you want to not use the internal reactor effects. You want to use your own effects, and you want to affect each sample layer individually. Well, what you can do is we could put this on a channel. So we're going to put it on channel 54, and we can come in FL Studios. What you would do is you got to make sure you have the multi-out version of reactor, and you go to your processing under the cog window and hit auto map outputs. Cool. So we have our automap outputs all set up, and then we simply switch from stereo to multi-out. And if we look at our mixer, check it out. If we hit some notes, there are all the individual samples, so we can individually process them if that's something that you want to do. Part of the genius of this is because it's controlled randomization, you'll get a lot of results that otherwise would take a lot of effort to get and are usually kind of random anyway. So you might pull in like 8 samples and you want to create a cool multi-sample layered thing, like something similar to what S-Layer does. Well, you'd have to pull it in and stretch and affect and just do loads of stuff that is just unintuitive because of all the extra steps. You may come up with a workflow. You may come up with buses and things, so you can still take advantage of your maybe you've developed a real tight workflow for this sort of stuff. You can take advantage of that workflow over here still, but you could still use this to speed up the process. Maybe you just want this to spit out different sample combinations and you'll do all the other work, like whatever you want to do. If you want more intense control, then you just do it the other way anyways. You could pull out and stretch and take particular parts of the sample if that's something that you're really into. Another neat thing about the controlled randomization here is we can actually set minimum and maximum values for all of these sliders with these guys down here. And these guys will allow us to control it. So let's say that we only want to control... Sorry about that, I cut myself off. These guys will allow us to control, in this example, the sample range. So I said, oh, only select samples from our sample map between 60 and 100. So let's say that we only had samples there, and all the other ones were no samples, so it would just be silent. Well, now we can control that. So just a lot of nifty and handy-dandy features about S-Layer. that's sort of my 2 cents on it real quick. We're going to do a rundown in the next video where we cover everything and just give it a real fast, just a one-shot video. But this is just an introduction showing you a couple of its abilities. We barely even touched its power. We're just looking at a lot of the features and functionalities that it has. But if you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.